Hello friends, it is I, Trevor Lidke, once again, here with probably the final TWF video I'll be making. I don't normally take requests, not on this channel or my main channel, Media Mementos, but I just had to do it this time because not only have a lot of people suggested it, but I think it's genuinely something that I should do before we change the channel. I'm gonna go through the entire history of Thumb Wrestling Federation, how I would have made it. And for those of you who are joining thinking that this is a full retrospective on the original Thumb Wrestling Federation, no. This is my fan-made addition to the series, so sorry if that's what you thought it was, you can go ahead and leave, but if you're still interested, cool, welcome. And one last thing before we continue, even though I've said that I wouldn't allow it in my last video, I've still got a ton of people asking to either use my original characters that I made for this series, or being my successor in the sense of continuing my show or my continuity? My answer is still firmly no. I do not allow it, I do not authorize it, no, no, no. I'm sure that you got tons of good ideas or would make everybody act in character, but my decision is still no. I may not own Thumb Wrestling Federation, but I own my contributions to the series, Again, none of these are official, I've said that in the description of every video, but it's still my continuity, my matches, my script, my voices, my characters. Well, not all my characters, the ones I created, the 5. And of course we'll talk more about them later, but still, I just wanted to throw that disclaimer out there. No, the show and continuity are done, the characters are not being used again. You can make your own TWF show, just it can't have anything to do with mine, okay? Anyways, let's start talking about how this thing came to be. I first got the idea for Thumb Wrestling Federation how I would have made it in my junior year of college. I was feeling a little nostalgic one day and decided to go through some of my old iTunes files and relive some of the things that I loved as a kid. And sure enough, one of the first things I found was Thumb Wrestling Federation. Yeah, some of the episodes were on iTunes. They were delisted around 2011, 2012, but they were there. And this big wave of just childhood wonder came over me because the show not only held up pretty well, but I got the opportunity to put myself in my younger self's shoes. As I've said before in the past, I was there from when this show was on Nicktoons Network and Cartoon Network. From the very beginning, I adored this show. But as it tends to happen, I grew up. And when I grew up, I got interested in other things. But seeing this again kind of reignited that spark. And I think part of the reason was because around this time, I was kind of exploring more of my creative writing. I've always wanted to be either a writer or voice actor in some capacity. So I felt, hey, why not try and do some of this myself on a side channel and make some fan-made contributions to shows I like, or remake shows that I felt could have been good but actually suck? I did a few of these and decided to try my hand at Thumb Wrestling Federation. Given that each match would be about 3 to 6 minutes long, at least that's the intended goal, they frequently went way over that, but anyways, I wouldn't just make one match. I'd make a whole season, and not only that, but the season would be made the way I wanted, which means that it would be built on 2 principles. 1, I would add to the show in ways that I felt it never really got to explore. For example, deeper characterization or stronger storylines. They had a pretty good one in Season 4, but that one with Cleet Cunningham in Season 5? Total mess. And the second would be using characters that I felt were kind of given the shaft in the original series. As good as characters like The Big Time or Hometown Huck or Mr. Extremo are, they always took up way too much of the spotlight, and yeah, I get it, they're the major wrestlers, they're the main characters, but still, they were always far from the most interesting. That's why I decided that this season would use a lot more characters that never really got to see much action, like Snagglefangs or Flashback, especially Flashback, we'll talk about him later. And I guess an honorary third thing that I would build this show off of was reusing some ideas that I had when I was a kid. Little 10-year-old Trevor who wanted to make his own Thumb Wrestling Federation episode someday, he came up with a lot of ideas that were, they were something. See, when you grow up, you kind of look back at some of the things you made when you were a kid and go, how did I ever think this was good? Trust me, if it hasn't happened to you yet, it will. But that's not to say that young Trevor had nothing but bad ideas. In fact, some of them were actually pretty decent on paper. It's just that when he decided to write some, they didn't really turn out so well. But that's not too bad because adult Trevor would swoop in and make everything right, meaning that it'd actually be watchable. The first thing I decided was that Evil Ira was going to be the champion, and that he was going to become a Dextera in the process. This was one of those aforementioned stories where young me came up with it and adult me made it good. Even though The Visitor was my favorite when I was younger, when I revisited the show, I realized that I liked Evil Ira the most. That, and I felt like I could do his voice decently well, so he was officially given the champion role, but who would he face in the championship? Originally, it was going to be Senator Skull, but I thought, that doesn't really embody what I'm going for with this season. It's all about giving spotlight to lesser-focused wrestlers, so may as well be somebody else. That's when my attention got drawn to Rolf the Reaper. Rolf is a lot like Evil Ira in many ways. They're both dark, they're both sinister, they both have connections to the occult. But where Evil Ira is fantastical and whimsical, Rolf the Reaper's depressed and pessimistic. I couldn't think of a better pairing. And when it came to some of the other matches, some were made because, oh yeah, this'll be a fun pairing. Lucky O'Leary and the Scorpion, alright. Captain Carpal and Mahi Mahi Mindy, pretty cool, nice. Some of them were more because wrestlers had common themes, like Sir Serpent and Cleet Cunningham were both from the UK. But then there were others where I'm surprised that the show itself never really managed to do something like this. For example, Idiot vs. Idiot in Big Star vs. Dwayne Bramage. Or how's about Milty the Clown, the funniest wrestler in the TWF, versus Rolf the Reaper, the guy who can never laugh? And also, goes without saying, Billy Batboy had to be in this season because he's just so fun and pathetic. And yes, I'm still proud of that Vinny Vitti victory versus Senator Skull troll in the beginning of that match. I know that it got a lot of people upset, but I don't care because it was funny. One of the matches I was most excited about may actually surprise you. It was Flashback versus Mr. Extremo. This was because, well, one, Flashback would make his triumphant return since he hadn't been seen since the pilot, but also because it was going to be a real upset. Flashback, who hadn't wrestled in years, versus arguably the best fighter on the Mighty Dexteras. I'm sure everyone would have expected this to be a blowout on Extremo's part, but no, that was the twist. And boy did it blow people's minds. I still remember some of those comments and, man, that was so much fun to go through. Now that I had all the matches planned out, I had to decide the order. I used to do a lot of Thumb Wrestling Federation voice impressions back in the day, but it had been years since I've ever gone back to do them. And I knew I was going to have to practice a lot as the show went on. So I needed to start the first couple matches off with voices that I knew I could do pretty well with little to no practice. That's why the first three matches were Sick Vic vs. Ouch, Rolf the Reaper vs. Milty the Clown, and Big Star vs. Dwayne Bramage. I knew I could do those well and no one would bat an eye. All the while, in the background, I would be practicing the other voices to make sure they were ready to go. Some were, and some definitely weren't. I had quickly learned that my least favorite voices to do were Dorsal Flynn and Enfuego, mostly because I could never really keep them consistent. I'd always slip into somebody else's voice, or it'd crack, or break, or falter. It wasn't good. That's why they didn't have a lot of appearances. It's because, personally, I felt like I couldn't really do the voices well enough to keep them coming. There was also a similar problem later on. I know I'm jumping the gun a bit, but I would also find that some characters didn't show up a lot in the original series for a reason. There's not a lot you can do with characters like Lucky O'Leary or Mahi Mahi Mindy, especially given that their shtick really gets old after a while. Anyways, once I recorded the first match, again Sick Vic vs. Ouch, I had to find my own background music because, honestly, Thumb Wrestling Federation doesn't really have its own soundtrack. And a lot of people have asked what music I've used for what character, and what music I use just in general. I'd love to answer that, but truth be told, I don't know. That's because when I saved the audio, I didn't save it under its original name. I saved it under Round 1 and 2, Round 3, TWF Ending, Championship Celebration, and a whole bunch of stuff like that, so I'd love to answer you, but I don't know. Sorry. When Ouch vs. Sick Vic came out, it did pretty well for a channel that just got started. Granted, it didn't go viral or anything, but getting 100 views in a day or so, not bad. Especially since looking back now after all the other seasons I've made, the voices are really, really rough. Sick Vic and Ouch sound pretty good, but Dick and Colonel? Ugh, no. Those were some of the casualties of this whole thing. I had to grow into those voices. Dick Thompson especially. I really had to practice a lot with that guy to make him sound even remotely similar to the original guy. But little by little, as I kept posting matches, I got more and more of an audience. I'd say it was around Flashback vs. Mr. Extremo where I really got a firm fan base. I guess word had been spreading about what I've been doing, and by that point, I think my voices were starting to get better and better. And wouldn't you know it, more people kept coming back again and again to watch my stuff. And having an audience this into it and this supportive, especially since at this point the pandemic had started and I was mostly using this as an outlet to keep myself entertained, I was thrilled. And it made me even more motivated to keep the show going. And then, of course, it all came to the end with Evil Ira versus Rolf the Reaper. This was my first ever TWF Championship match, and truth be told, I thought it would be my last one too. I had no plans to keep the series going. There was no second season in mind, there was no plans for a spin-off, nothing. I was going to move on to the next project and have this as a happy little memory. But the support I got was so extreme and so high volume that I knew I couldn't let this go. I loved making it, you guys loved watching it. Why not keep going? I had so many other ideas that I had to scrap because there wasn't enough room in the last season. Why not use some of those? This would include using characters that I didn't get to use in the last season, and also bringing back some favorites that I either loved to write for, loved to voice, or even both. I had quickly come to learn that the Lost Viking was my favorite character to voice, even though his voice was a little grating on my vocal cords. I don't know, maybe it's the fact that it sounds really close to the original, or that it's really expressive despite being so deep and gruff, or the fact that he had a lot of fun things to do in this next season. I don't know, he was my favorite, and then I'd say The Visitor, then Evil Ira. And even though he hadn't appeared yet, I'd say after that the Nether Beast would be number 4, but I'm not going to make a whole list. You don't really care about that. What you do care about is how I decided to make Ouch TWF champion of how I would have made it season 2. And truth be told, it was kind of a long process. I wasn't sure who to make the next champion because I had a lot of ideas on the table that I found pretty interesting. There was Danny Kaboom, James Montgomery Flag, Face Off Phil making up for his season 3 loss. But in the end, I decided to go with Ouch to really mess with people's heads. For one thing, it was kind of to recapture that surprise that people had when Flashback beat Mr. Extremo. But it was also because I wanted to keep pushing how far I could make these story arcs, I don't know, deeper, more interesting, but above all, more suspenseful. I know that it was obvious that a Dexterra was going to win in the end, but I wanted to make the ride as edge-of-your-seat, action-packed, suspenseful as possible. And why not have one of the joke wrestlers be the guy who takes us there? That fighter, of course, was Ouch, and he would go up against one of the most brutal and vicious fighters on the Sinistras, the Lost Viking, which meant that Ouch would have to take on a lot of vicious foes like the Amoeba or Senator Skull. Ouch vs. Senator Skull is one of the most fun times I've ever had writing an episode, and to this day, it's still one of my favorites. Just like last time, I reused some ideas that I had when I was younger, like Tomcat vs. Queen Nefercreepy, Ouch vs. Billy Batboy, or Pierre Pamplemousse vs. Scoutmaster Scott. And then there was that Royal Thumble where I decided, hey, there's already that first one and they said there'd be a second, and there never was. Why don't I try my hand at it? And I never tried it again because I didn't really enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, I'm still proud of the episode and all, it's just, I don't know. I would have much rather made regular matches than another one of those. especially since Royal Fumble championships basically mean nothing. It more felt like filler, I guess. Overall, I definitely think Season 2 was a big improvement over Season 1. My voices were a lot stronger and closer to the original, I had a better understanding of how to make the scripts work, and of course, having a giant fanbase like this made it that much more fun. Season 3 is where things got a little interesting because around this time, the job I had, which by the way had no days off, not even weekends, was really starting to take its toll. The release dates in between matches became wider and wider, and that's because I didn't have the time to make them, at least not as frequently as I used to. This is where some problems started arising though, because a lot of people, no matter how many times I tried to explain it, didn't really seem to understand that I did a lot more than just this channel. That was where things started getting a little less fun, but those people weren't the whole of my audience. In fact, I'd say for every one of those, there were 10 actually good people who were coming back to enjoy the matches, cheer me on, check in, or give their thoughts on what just happened. And to reward those beautiful, beautiful people, I decided to take this series to new heights and do something totally unheard of. Bringing a character from the sidelines into the ring, Captain Esplanade. And it went without saying that he'd be the champion too. And this whole season was basically made out of ideas that I had when I was younger. So yeah, this is the most recycled season. At least in terms of matches from the main story. I mean, come on, Captain Esplanade had to be the champion. He can't just be in this big debut season thing and lose in the quarterfinals or not even make it. Not after all this build-up, you know? Scoutmaster Scott was purely made to be his championship rival because, well, that's what younger me would have wanted. That's what he planned out. All the quarterfinal matches and semifinal matches that Scoutmaster Scott and Captain Esplanade made, those were drafted when I was 10 years old. Yep, even the Bucks Gazillion stuff. And it was this season that made me realize that I can't keep putting Scoutmaster Scott in matches because he's the voice that just destroys my vocal cords the most. The hardest time I've ever had to record in this entire show was Scoutmaster Scott versus Mr. Extremo, because you got Scoutmaster Scott, who's throaty and gravelly, you got Mr. Extremo, who's throaty and gravelly, and you got Colonel Cossack, who's throaty and gravelly and screams. I think it took me 3 days or something to record the whole match because I got laryngitis within minutes. And overall, this is the story that I feel has the most satisfactory impact, at least of the regular seasons. Because we got Captain Esplanade, who, up until recently, was a coward hiding on the sidelines and was basically just an Xterra for having the label and that's it, to being a fierce fighter who stands up for what's right. And giving him a love interest helped, at least in my personal opinion. It kinda made him seem more like a real person rather than just a guy with a funny catchphrase. And a lot of people wondered why after this I never introduced Chico Rojo or Laughing Looney to the ring. And that's because I only introduced Captain Esplanade to the main fighting cast because he really needed it. He didn't have anything going for him, not a personality, not a dynamic, not a friendship, nothing. He needed to be put in the ring to become an actual character and someone that the audience would want to see. Laughing Looney and Chico Rojo have personalities, friendships, and dynamics, even if they don't actually fight. They're Senator Skull's right-hand men. They always try to cheat for him or are up to some crazy schemes, and you always have a fun time when they show up, but Captain Esplanade, it's blink and you miss it. Similarly, that's why I didn't put the stash in either. That, and also he's supposed to be retired. He only stepped in that one time to help his son because his son was clearly not gonna win. There, I hope that explains that. And then came Season 4. My personal life may have been very, very busy around this time, but I didn't care. I was ready to make these matches something special. And that was by making not one, not two, but 5 new wrestlers added to the roster. I didn't think this was possible at first because, well, how was I going to make a TWF mask? Through a lot of patience. That's how it happened. From the originally proposed 9 wrestlers, I only ended up keeping 5. And out of fear of people trying to steal my wrestlers and claim, oh, I can use these because they weren't in the original show, I won't be sharing who those 4 cut wrestlers were. But if you've ever talked to me during this time when I was throwing out ideas, you probably know who they are. And besides, the 5 that I did keep were easily the best ones. There was Erg, a zombie who was partially based on my frustrations with Tom Zombie. Don't get me wrong, it's a cool little stunt and all, but I felt like they could have gone even further with the zombie thing, and that's where Erg came to be. Out of the 5, Erg was the hardest to voice because I always had to get it just right. It couldn't just be, It had to be a deep lurch, back-throated. It's hard to explain, but trust me, it wasn't always easy, but it was fun. Cactus Jeff, a Wild West outlaw. I think his was the oldest one I created because I had this idea from, again, when I was little. In fact, Cactus Jeff is the only original wrestler that young me made that I decided to bring back. All these other 4, they were creations of modern day me. Woo! The Nether Beast, who's basically a walking nightmare, voice inspired by Peter Lorre and having the shtick of bringing everyone's worst fears to life. I found that to be a really interesting concept that could bring the character on a lot of crazy adventures or have him be involved in a ton of storylines. And if you're watching this going, wait, there was only 1 season after this, why would that matter? I'll get to that later, don't worry. And on the Dexterra's side, there was Dr. Shrink, a psychiatrist who originally was going to be a joke character, but then I thought, you know what? This might actually be an interesting way to explore some dynamics in between wrestlers and see what's going on in their heads. And because I wanted to do it, and purely for no other reason, I gave him Archibald Asparagus' voice. Yeah, Archibald Asparagus from VeggieTales. It was not a coincidence. And then finally, rounding out the cast was Grayson Glitz, who originally was going to be one of Colonel's least favorite wrestlers, but then I felt, nah, there's no point in that. He already hates the Stash and Milty the Clown, why not make him obsessed, even though Grayson's not exactly the best fighter. His voice was based on Xander from Drawn Together. And also, Grayson is the only mask that I still have today. The others either were repurposed or unraveled or thrown out. But yeah, Grayson's still in my possession. He's somewhere in my storage unit, and maybe someday I'll bring him out and show him off, but I don't know. We'll see. Since this was a big occasion that I felt really deserved a lot of attention, I felt that one of the new fighters should be either the champion or the runner-up. When comparing all the characters and seeing who had the best star quality, sorry Grayson, it was the Nether Beast that won, and because I didn't really want a Sinistro championship yet, I decided to make him the runner-up. And kind of like what I did with Evil Ira's championship, I had to think to myself, who would be the best foil for the Nether Beast to fight? And after doing a lot of hard thinking, I settled on Wasabi. Because Wasabi may seem very confident and outspoken, but as shown in her biography, she has a lot of troubles and insecurities, and yeah, she kind of got over those, but they could always come back. Plus, it would also be cool to give Wasabi a little more character than her thing with Pinky that barely got any focus, or the whole rhyming thing. So why not? And in order to really build up how scary the Nether Beast was, I decided to make him go up against either some of the toughest or most fearless fighters on the Mighty Dexterras. And boy, seeing the reaction to his first fight with Evil Ira, a lot of people immediately picked up that, yeah, this guy is gonna be a big deal. And he was! Congratulations, everyone who guessed it! Well done! By this point, I was running out of ideas that I could reuse from my childhood days. In fact, looking at the list now, the only ones that I reused in this season were Miss Fitwell versus Billy Batboy, Cleet Cunningham versus the Cheetah, Hometown Huck versus Cactus Jeff, and Unit 19G versus the Scorchion. That's it. Nothing else. And this season was home to some of my favorites, especially one of the ones I'm most proud of. I think you know which one this is. Muggsy Thumbscrew versus Mahi Mahi Mindy. I've said many times that Mindy is my least favorite wrestler because, well, 1, she is cruel and evil, and 2, she's really boring. There's nothing to do with her. That's why she only appeared like, what was it, twice? There was nothing to get out of her, and I tried. Yeah, she's an activist. Yeah, she likes fish. So what? All of her shtick can either be done by Wasabi, Gil, or Captain Carpal. She doesn't have anything special. So why not use her second and definitely final appearance, because I didn't plan to use her again after this, to call her out for her evil ways. Yeah, I don't know if you guys remember the match Mahi Mahi Mindy versus Rolf the Reaper, where Mindy not only cheats to win when she most certainly should have lost, but she does basically emotional blackmail tactics in order to cripple her opponent and then pin him to the ground. Is that something that a mighty Dextera would do? And of course, when she's called out on this, it couldn't just be any Sinistra, it had to be one of the baddest of the bad. And that was Muggsy Thumbscrew. Good job, Muggsy. I knew I liked you for a reason. Season 4 was going really smoothly until the end of the quarterfinals, where suddenly, I had an epiphany. I can't keep doing this forever. I don't just want to be known as the TWF guy, and by this point that's all the channel was, and I didn't like that at all. It was taking up a lot of my time, limited time I might add, that I could be using to focus on my main channel or explore other voice acting or creative writing possibilities. It also didn't help that I was drastically running out of ideas. I had 3 other seasons planned, full of matches. I had the matches written out, guys. At least the matches themselves, not necessarily the story or script. Because when I tried, it all just felt so repetitive. Each season had been getting bigger and bigger in scale, and my proposed 5th, 6th, and 7th seasons weren't really doing it for me. They felt like a step back. And I don't want to just keep doing the status quo because people might find it fun. I want to give them something with substance and something that they'll want to keep coming back to again and again. Not just a cheap nostalgic thrill. So I decided that I was going to end the series with one final season. And it was going to be the biggest one yet. This way, I would never run out of ideas, I would never run the show into the ground, I would never overstay my welcome, I would have 5 solid seasons, and then call it good. And instead of making the last season another regular match, quarterfinal, semifinal, championship sort of deal, I wanted to shake things up. Give it a real big, on-edge, make or break, ride and die kind of feel. And that was by making it a 13-round sudden death tournament, which was later shortened down to 7. It all got kicked off with a big reveal that Bucks Gazillion had purchased the TWF, and now it was up to the Mighty Dexteras and Evil Sinistras to team up and oust him once and for all. It left on a big cliffhanger where it laid out the rules of the upcoming tournament and leaving everyone wondering what was going to happen to the TWF. But it did so longer than I thought it would. I took a 1-year hiatus in between seasons 4 and 5. I've mentioned what happened a few times before, but I think this video will get a lot more traction than those other ones. So I may as well tell you what happened in between seasons 4 and 5, and what made me disappear. I moved out of my original state to a new state, and specifically in a small mountain town that I currently still live in, and I accepted a job that was basically hell. It was horrendous. Again, no days off, no breaks, but it gets even worse. The people who were running this thing were not only cruel and probably bipolar, but I think some of them on top should have been in jail. There was some severe fraud going on. I was miserable, stressed out, overworked, every bad thing you could think of, and as much as I tried to keep going back to Thumb Wrestling Federation, I just couldn't. I mean, I was able to do my main stuff on Media Mementos decently well, but my drive to do Thumb Wrestling Federation really wasn't there. Not helping is that later on I realized that I was suffering from severe burnout, but that combined with my stressful situation from which there seemed to be no escape, let's just say it didn't exactly make me the most productive person. And I know what you're gonna ask, why didn't you just leave? Well, my town doesn't really have a whole lot of people. Heck, my county doesn't have a whole lot of people. Especially in the field I used to be in, jobs were very limited, so I had to just wait and wait for something else to come by, and eventually, around the 1-year mark, it did. And that's when I started posting more Thumb Wrestling Federation videos. Albeit a bit slowly at first, but I picked up steam. Good thing a lot of those episodes were planned out ahead of time, right? Even so, when I was making the final season, I still felt pretty burnt out. I had a lot of fun, don't get me wrong, but I kept feeling that I really don't want to do another season of this. I just can't. Well, for one, I literally could not, because the way the season would end the series for good. But also, again, I wasn't feeling motivated to do it. I didn't have any more ideas. I wanted to explore other things. But why let the audience suffer for that, especially when they've waited for about a year? I was going to give them everything they wanted. A big story, fan favorite characters returning, some highly anticipated matches like Big Star versus the Big Time, another redemption arc, and of course, Vinny Vitti Victory versus Senator Skull actually happening for real this time, not just a troll. Of course, with this season, I did decide to troll people a little bit with the whole Scoutmaster Scott versus Danny Kaboom or versus Gil thing. I kept changing around who was going to win that match and which fighter was going to be in it, and it drove people nuts. And I loved it. I love you guys, but sometimes I like to mess with people I like, you know? Ask my girlfriend, she can testify. And wouldn't you know it, all three appeared. I wanted to give Season 5 a real sense of finality, not just in the sense that the Sinistros were defeated forever, but also wrapping up some character arcs from some of the fan favorites. Big Star would finally come into his own and be proud of himself and not value himself based on what his cousin thought of him. Grayson Glitz would realize what it means to be a true Dextera. And then there was going to be that one match that blew everyone's minds, and sure enough, it got exactly the reaction I wanted. You know the one, Face Off Phil versus the Lost Viking, the first and only tie in the series. Sure enough, everyone was freaking out going, what's gonna happen? Oh no, this next match! Ah! And I loved it. Not just because I liked the reactions I got from you guys, but also because it just reminded me of how invested you guys were, and it brought me back to a place that I hadn't been in since I started the season. It reminded me of why I loved making the first 3.5 seasons, which ended up making me super motivated in the rest of the episodes going forward. And I'll be honest, when I was recording and editing for the last match, I felt kind of sad. I will be fully honest that there was a little part of me that wanted to go back on my word and maybe find another way to make some more seasons. Thumb Wrestling Federation, how I would have made it, had been part of my life for about 2 years. Even if one of those years was spent entirely in inactivity, but still. It just felt hard to say goodbye. But at the end of the day, I knew that it's what I had to do. Either you go out a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I was not going to let that happen. The finale was super well received. Everyone was really happy with the series overall. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I loved making this show. It was a fantastic experience. And it really got me connected with my inner child again. Sometimes when I made it, I felt like I really was that 3rd and 4th grader in his backyard with those Thumb Wrestling Federation masks, making his own matches and coming up with his own storylines. It felt rejuvenating. It felt fresh. And the fact that I was able to share it with all you guys and that you loved it so much, it just made it that much better. Of course, there were some problem fans and everything, and some really unprovoked freakouts in the comments, but a vast majority of you guys, I'd say most actually, you were amazing, and if you ever want to check out Media Mementos, my main channel, I'd be happy to see you there. Feel free to stop on by. That channel also has a Discord server. I'm not usually super active, because I've got a 9 to 5 now, but I do get weekends off. Yeah. And generally speaking, I like to keep busy in my personal life. But feel free to DM me or something. I'd like to catch up with some of you guys. I've had some fun conversations with you in the comments or on the old, now defunct Lidkey library server. So yeah, don't be a stranger. And that, my friends, is the complete history of Thumb Wrestling Federation, how I would have made it. What started off as this simple childhood revisiting nostalgia thing and way to keep me entertained during the quarantine became this not huge thing, but really well loved. So well loved, in fact, that people have officially declared them canon and put them on the wiki. The wiki itself, from what I hear from you guys, is full of lies anyways, and I do not support Wikipedia or wiki vandalism whatsoever. Though I will say this is really flattering that out of all the fan series out there, this is the one that people considered canon. I don't know, maybe you guys could fill me in the comments. Is it the voices? Is it the writing? Is it a combination? I don't know. I'd like to know, though. Anyways, I hope you guys will stick around for what's going to come in the future, or will follow my main channel, but if not, it was great to have you here. Thank you again for joining me on this wonderful 2-year journey, and I'll see you guys later, okay? Thanks for watching.